Good morning, guys, and the people have spoken. I put up a poll last week asking which Ver-Ka kit I should take a look at because I had a hankering to build a master grade Ver-Ka kit, and this one won by a gigantic margin. Here is the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Ver-Ka. This is a 2017 standard release that I got for $71, which is a bit expensive for a Master Grade, but with how this design is taller than your typical Master Grade, how it comes with all this extra stuff and all of these gimmicks, I feel like that kind of price is warranted for a kit like this. Now, the Double Zeta Gundam is a design I like quite a bit, which makes it pretty unfortunate that it feels like the neglected middle child of the classic protagonist Gundam mobile suits, being wedged in between the very iconic Zeta Gundam and the new Gundam, both of which are titans of Gunpla, having kits across essentially every major line, except for, I don't think the Zeta has an entry grade kit, and the new Gundam actually does have one, and I think every single line, if you count the PGU as part of the PG line, when that comes out next year. I don't know if I'm going to be taking a look at that kit. It is extremely expensive, so I don't know if I'm going to end up picking it up, but I digress. Unfortunately, the Double Zeta Gundam seems to be pretty neglected, sitting in between those two, with its last Master Grade being, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but the Enhanced Double Zeta from like 2002, and even in the high grade line, it came out at a kind of awkward time when high grades are transitioning from the kind of older classic style of high grades to what we would consider a modern high grade back in like 2010 or 2011 in the HGUC line. So it wasn't old enough to warrant getting like a revive kit like many of the other classic designs did. So it's in this kind of awkward spot where it just really hasn't been getting many kits. And I believe the Ver-Ka kit here, if you don't count the Phaz, is the most recent Double Zeta kit that we've got. I've heard very good things about this, but I am a little bit worried because, as a lot of you may know, one of this kit's many gimmicks is that it is formed by having two like transformed big fighter things dock with a core fighter to form the Double Zeta Gundam. And 2 years before this kit was made was the V2 Ver-Ka, which had a very similar gimmick, being made of 3 different flying units that turned into one, and that kit had horrific articulation. It could barely articulate. I took a look at that kit in March with the V2 AB Gundam, so I am worried that this might suffer from similar issues, but I am cautiously optimistic because I have heard very incredible things about this kit. So getting into the box art here now, in very typical Ver-Ka styling, here you just have a very nice illustration of the Double Zeta standing there staring at the camera with all of its decals on. And as you may be able to see here with the text, this mobile suit stands at almost 20 meters tall. This kit is noticeably taller than the Gundams that came before it, although still shorter than the new Gundam. This kit is kind of an homage to the Super Robot series, being larger and bulkier than previous Gundams, being made of several units that transform and dock together, and even having its own, I guess, signature weapon with a iconic pose to go with it in the High Mega Cannon. So another reason I like this kit is basically a Super Robot Gundam. On the side here, you have some more information on the Double Zeta Gundam over here. You have the painted build of it transformed into G-Fortress mode, and then you just have the painted build of the Double Zeta staying there front and back. Very impressive looking. I do really like this design. I'm really looking forward to this build. And then, of course, you get a bunch of close-ups of the Double Zeta here, showing off all of the Ver-Ka water slides that you will be putting all over this kit. And on the other side here, we have a blurb talking about the Master Grade Ver-Ka series as a whole, and talking about the, I guess, all of the gimmicks recreated in this kit with the transformation and combination gimmicks and things like that. And here you have the painted builds of the kit split up into its 3 different units from top to bottom. You have the Neo Core Fighter, you have the Core Top, and the Core Base. These two will jet out their Neo Core Fighter like cockpit heads and dock with the Neo Core Fighter at the top, Judo's Core Fighter, to form the Double Zeta Gundam. So of course I will be showing this off in its separated like different flyer forms, because I think unlike something like the V2 Gundam, I do actually really like how the separated flyer forms look for this kit, so I do want to show that off. And hopefully it's a little less fragile than that kit, so I'm not like terrified to transform it without breaking something. But of course, inside the box, we will get 9 bags of runners, which is not actually that much. I was expecting a lot more, especially from the design this complex and crazy, but I do still believe this will build up to be an incredibly nice Master Grade build. And then, of course, we will also be getting this standard Ver-Ka manual here for the Double Zeta, and I don't know if you're able to see that, but this is quite thick, presumably because of all of the transformation combination gimmicks seen throughout this kit. So first we have a lot of what we saw on the sides of the box, showing off all the different parts of the kit with this nice painted build, showing off all the micro missiles in the backpack. Hopefully these are color separated, showing off the back of the kit, the front of the kit, the High Mega Cannon up here, all of the boosters on the legs, this generic painted pilot figure here, and one painted for Judo up there. Of course, we're showing off the Neo Core Fighter, the Core Top, the Core Base, showing off the Double Zeta here and the very iconic High Mega Cannon firing pose, which you will be seeing in the posing section. Everything forming together to make the G-Fortress mode, the Hyper Beam Sabers, the Double Beam Rifle, all of this very iconic stuff all over the Double Zeta that make it an incredible design that I really like, and it is quite a shame that we haven't really seen many kits of it throughout the years. Of course, on the inside here, you will get your parts list. A lot of these runners are going to be pretty huge and kind of fitting with the Double Zeta being a large Gundam. So of course, plenty of runners here for lots of part separation, so this kit will probably look quite nice. Unfortunately though, as you can see there is a polycap runner. So with the very bulky and large design of the Double Zeta, we will see how those polycaps hold up, but I am fairly optimistic that it will hold up quite well. And of course, you're building two Neo Core fighters here, one for Judo himself and one for a secondary pilot that will be operating the core base, I believe. So you are going to be building two of them. And this looks like a fairly simple but competent build, which I don't really think is going to be that big of a deal because again, it's going to be folded up inside the Double Zeta for most people when they display this kit, so I don't think it's that big a deal for it to be kind of simple, but it is a simple design in general, so I guess it's fitting. Then we get into building the chest unit here, which looks fairly typical master grady. Continue your chest build here, and then you kind of flip the torso down over the rest of the assembly to complete your chest. Then you build your head here, which looks very typical master grade with inner frame and everything, a polycap for the neck, which shouldn't be an issue. Of course, you have your V-fin split in two for the transformation gimmick. And then, of course, you put in your secondary, like, forehead crest thing with the high mega cannon over it. Then you build your arms here, which looks, again, very typical master grade fashion, although there is some, like, manipulation you need to do during assembly because of the transformation gimmicks in the Double Zeta. But lots of part separation, complete inner frame, everything you would expect from a Verka. This looks like it's going to be a very nice construction here. You get into your shoulders, which have these flaps on them for when it's in the core top mode. Of course, mounting your big wing shields there to the forearms. Then you start getting into your legs, which looks very typical master grady. A little bit of weirdness in the construction with things like the feet being on like a little rail in there, but that's mostly for the facilitating the transformation into the core base. And of course, we get into building the lower leg unit here, which looks fairly involved. The boosters that go on the sides of the legs, and then you split off into your individual leg constructions. Then of course, you complete both of your legs here. Then you get into a bit of like an interview here, talking about designing the Double Zeta, I believe. So you get all this really nice information on the inside here. You can pause if you want to read it. Someone in the comments of the poll had mentioned that this interview is quite interesting, and it goes over things like why the Double Zeta's transformation was actually pretty easy to design for this kit. So that is something fairly interesting that I'm going to definitely be reading after I finish recording this segment. Then you get into your waist here, which doesn't look anything too out of the ordinary. If anything, it looks a bit simpler than a lot of other master grade kits. Then you get into your very large, impressive backpack there. So you get your micro missiles here, which are going to be part separated, and I believe, hopefully these are going to be color separated. And of course, you put all of your thrusters in the backpack, you build your hyper beam sabers there, and then you fully assemble your lower body there. And then you assemble the full body, which I thought they were going to do a thing where you build up the three separated like fighters first, and then you combine them to the G-Fortress, and then combine them into the Double Zeta Gundam. But looks like the manual is telling you to make the Double Zeta Gundam first, and will presumably tell you how to transform all the individual parts later. Then, of course, you get into the only like handheld ranged weapon of this kit, the double beam rifle over here, which looks like a fairly nice construction for a master grade. And then, of course, you talk about how to transform the entire Double Zeta into G-Fortress mode. So I didn't actually notice anything too jank about the construction, so I am cautiously optimistic about this transformation being fairly seamless and the kit actually being able to articulate. Of course, the usual kind of manipulation stuff with the legs, and then talking about manipulating the backpack to make this really impressive top unit on the G-Fortress, and they're talking about how to deploy landing gear and things like that mounting on an action base. And then now it's telling you how so it's kind of operating in reverse, where it's telling you once you have the G-Fortress, this is how you separate it into the individual core top and core base, instead of combining the core top and core base into the G-Fortress and then the Double Zeta Gundam. So once you get through that, you will have your color guide in the back here in both English and Japanese in full color, and then of course your water slide decal marking sheet here. All the usual Verka styling with all of these like very detailed small like marking decals and things like that. So overall, this looks like it's going to be a very interesting build that I'm really looking forward to because, again, I love this design, but let's get into the contents of the bags. So inside the bags, we will get 18 runners, which is quite a few, especially when you consider that most of these runners are actually full size, so there are quite a few parts inside of this box to create the Double Zeta. Of course, in addition to them, you will be getting this metallic color correcting sticker sheet containing the usual suspects with this metallic, I guess, teal green color here for the eyes, head cameras, and the camera for the double beam rifle. So very nice that this kit is presumably entirely color accurate minus the metallic details, which I don't blame for needing color correcting stickers at all. And of course, in addition to that, we will be getting this rather large and intimidating water slide decal sheet, very kind of in line with the usual Verka kits. So once these are all on the kit, this should really enhance the look of this kit, make it look a lot more detailed and fantastic. And while I'm kind of dreading the monotony of having to put these on, I do think the end product is going to be more than worth it. So of course, as for the runners themselves, so these runners were printed in July of 2022, starting with runner PC211 here for a set of master grade 1100 polycaps here. This is going to be parts for some of the joints, including things like the neck and I believe the wrists. So with most of the key structural joints of the Double Zeta being full PS plastic frame, I don't suspect that these polycaps will pose any issue whatsoever. So I believe all of these runners are going to be brand new for the master grade Double Zeta Ver-Ka. So we get 2 of runner A here being multicolored runners, coming in 4 different colors. We get the striking bold blue here containing a number of parts for things like the wings, parts for the Neo Core Fighter, parts for the big like wing shields, etc. We get plain clear here for parts for things like the canopies of the Core Fighters, landing gear, some parts for the eyes for the Double Zeta, etc. We get white here for a number of accent parts for the Neo Core Fighter. We get our sitting pilot figures, and we get some auxiliary wing parts, and we get some yellow accents here for like surrounding ventilation details all over the kit, as well as parts for the V-fins. Runner B in this primer frame gray, going to contain a number of joint parts and frame parts for all across this kit. Parts for things like the torsos, hips, the inner parts of the skirts, parts for the legs. We get our swappable finger style hands here, which looks like we are going to be getting the usual spread of closed fists, open expressive hands, trigger finger hands, and holding hands. Although I'm pretty sure these aren't open expressive hands. I think these are probably, yeah, they're definitely the hands for holding the hyper beam sabers because they're so large. They do just look like open expressive hands, but as you can see here from the rather large tabs in these fingers, these are definitely for holding the hyper beam sabers. 2 of runner C here containing more frame and joint parts for all across this kit. Parts for things like the legs, elbows, I think the knees, inner frame parts for the wings. You get the inner parts for all of the micro missiles in the backpack, a bunch of thruster parts there, and the barrels for the double beam rifle. 2 of runner D containing yet more frame parts for all across this kit for things like, okay, so you see the knees up there, so I don't think they were going to be on, I don't think they were on runner C, but the knees, legs, the parts connecting the legs into the waist, the feet, etc. 2 of runner E in white for many of the armor parts for all across this kit, parts for things like the skirts, the legs, the feet, the big boosters on the sides of the knees, the hyper beam sabers down here in the bottom right corner, etc. Runners F1 and F2 in this bold red color, going to be all of the red parts for all across this kit, for parts for things like the feet, inner parts for the thrusters, some accent parts surrounding ventilation and things like that. Some more thrusters, I think, for the Neo Core Fighters, parts for the like big wing forearm shields, and of course we get all of our micro missile parts here, part and color separated, which should look very striking on the kit once those like backpack hatches are open to show the Double Zeta firing all the micro missiles. Runner G1 here for the rest of our white parts for things like, I think, like either skirt or shoulder armor here, some accent parts, parts for constructing the head with the Gundam muzzle there, and of course we get our standing pilot figure of Judo there. Runner G2 here, which is a pleasant surprise, in plated silver for a number of different accent parts for all across this kit. All these metallic parts should provide some really nice splashes of reflective brightness all over this kit, although I am planning to matte top coat this, so I'm not exactly sure how much that will like dim these, but from my experience I think they should still look pretty striking even after something like a matte top coat. Runner H here for the rest of our like big bold blue parts, or things like the torso up here among other parts. We get 2 of runner I here in navy for a number of accent parts for all across this kit. We get some big wings here, parts for I think the backpack, and last but of course certainly not least, we get runner Z here. I'm not exactly sure what this is. This does seem to be part of a generic, like, I guess, beam effect runner from 2000. These are going to be beam effect parts for the hyper beam sabers here, and I believe I remember reading that these beam saber effect parts are actually from a perfect grade kit, like the perfect grade Zeta or something. The year 2000 design date seems to corroborate this, but these should be some incredibly massive, impressive weapons to display in the Double Zeta, and will take up a ton of space for sure. You're definitely going to be seeing that in the posing section. So from what I've seen, there's a lot to love about the construction of the Double Zeta, and this should make for a very pleasant build, and I will see you after that build. Alright, welcome back. Here's the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Ver-Ka snap built, panel lined, decaled up with the included water slide decals, and top coated with Mr. Hobby Premium Flat Top Coat. And wow, this is a really impressive kit, and I do really love how it wound up looking. There was a little bit of frosting on some of the parts that I sprayed just because of the spraying conditions. I think it was a little warmer than it should have been in the room that I was spraying it in, but I think I mostly resolved it. So if you notice any frosting or any inconsistencies with the like color tones across the kit, it might be because of that, so I apologize in advance if it's noticeable. But getting right into the build. So the build for this kit is quite unconventional, and it's the main reason why this video is going to be coming out a little bit later than it is, because this build is quite involved. Compared to a typical master grade, it is a degree or two more complex than what you would expect with a typical master grade. So if your only experience building master grades is with things like the Gundam Age, or anything based on the master grade ARC 78 2.0 frame, or the Wing master grades, anything like that, just be prepared and know that this is a more complex model just because of all the gimmicks and stuff included in it. And being a larger model and a very busy design, there is a ton of part separation all across this kit, which is very well conveyed in terms of the actual parts count and things, which does take plenty longer than a typical master grade to build. Again, a reason why this video is a bit late. So make sure to allocate, at least depending on how much time you have to build, at least a couple of weekends to building this kit and putting all the decals on and top coating it as a bare minimum to do this build justice. Now, the actual build is quite pleasant. There is plenty of undergating across the kit, so nub marks are less of an issue than you would expect with a bunch of other kits, although it is still noticeable in certain parts, which we'll talk about in a bit in the aesthetic section. Unfortunately, none of the plated silver parts are included among those undergated parts. So for the most part, it's not really that big a deal because the silver parts are just accents, and the parts where the nub marks are pretty much covered up by the model most of the time. There are some cases, notably in the double beam rifle, where the nub marks are visible on the silver, but again, I'll show it to you in the aesthetic section. So it's just something to keep in mind, because unfortunately for the plated silver parts, there's no real way to get rid of them. For most normal parts, you could just sand it or shave it down with like a hobby knife or something, and you could get the nub mark mostly removed with just a slight dark discoloration where it used to be. On the plated silver parts, not so, because if you file it or do any kind of material removal to clean up the nub mark, you're removing the plating around it, so it's just going to end up looking pretty terrible, which is a shame that none of the silver parts are actually undergated. Now, some of these undergated parts are also a bit inconvenient, namely in parts like the very small red parts in the elbows, like right above the forearm, because the actual nub marks where the undergate is in an incredibly tight spot, so you can't double snip it and call it a day. You need to shave it down with a hobby knife, so if you're not comfortable with that, just be prepared, because that is something you're going to have to do with this kit. So either become familiar with how to do it and become more comfortable with it, or avoid this kit if you really aren't comfortable getting rid of nub marks with a hobby knife, because that is something you will have to do on this kit. In addition, some frame parts are also very small and fragile, most notably in the torso, in the kind of lower blue part right above where the core fighter booster is. There are two little pieces of landing gear tucked away that you would use if you have it in core top and core base mode, just separately, on the ground with the landing gear deployed. That landing gear is incredibly small and fragile and attaches via a C-clip, so it is very easy to break. I broke mine. I put it back together with a plastic cement, but I'm still a little bit concerned that I won't really hold up. So on display, the kit separated into its two constituent big fighters. In the posing section, it will not be on the ground, it will be in the air because of that. So just letting you know, there are many parts in this kit that attach via C-clips and things like that, so just be very careful when assembling. It is very easy to cause stress marks or break many of these small fragile parts within the frame. There are also various small loss risks all across this kit, the worst offenders being the plated silver parts, most notably in the high mega cannon in the head. There is a very tiny silver part for the barrel that is incredibly easy to lose. Now, it is plated silver, so if you have a hardwood floor or something like that where the silver can very easily contrast, then you should have no problem finding it. If you have carpet like I do, it can very easily become lost in there, so just be very careful when you're assembling the kit. Don't drop anything. It is very easy to lose many of the parts, but getting past all of those relatively minor inconveniences, because again, like I said in the unboxing, I was pretty worried going into this that this would be a repeat of the V2 Gundam, which was all kinds of jank and really, I guess, odd in the construction, and which led to a ton of articulation problems. This has few issues reminiscent of that. While the construction is very unorthodox and weird, with many of the parts being oddly shaped and many kind of planned hollow parts inside the kit to facilitate the transformation and storage of the large thrusters in mobile suit mode, all of it feels odd but not jank like the V2 did. It's kind of hard to explain, but I hope it comes across that this, despite the few nuisances and things that I was mentioning earlier and problems with the build, for the most part is quite pleasant. Honestly, the biggest problem that you're going to have with the build is the amount of time that this takes. This is a very involved kit, and it really is doing everything it can to live up to its price tag. So overall for the build, a few things to keep in mind, like the fragile parts with C-clips on the insides of the frames, the loss risks for the very small silver parts all across the kit, the lack of undergating those silver parts does come through in certain places, which you'll see in a moment. But for the most part, in every like fundamental aspect of the build, this kit succeeds with aplomb. It is an incredibly fun and interesting kit to build. It is so, like, I guess, captivating watching the whole thing build up. I absolutely loved this build at the end of the day. So coming back to it spinning around in the booth, getting to the aesthetic section. So of course, as per usual, I will talk about the color accuracy of this kit before I get into my opinions on this design. So in terms of your color correcting stickers, these are going to be all of the usual suspects, all metallic green stickers that I do not blame this kit for having. Unfortunately, there are a couple of color inaccuracies that this kit has besides those, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So of course, stickers 1 and 2 are going to be for the green eyes here in the head, the eye mask that goes around them that is in a very dark gray, but appears black because of all the shadow cast by the other parts of the head. That is color separated, so you just need to worry about painting the metallic green in the eyes if you want to paint instead of using the color correcting stickers. Now, sticker 3, you get 2 of as this spins around. I'm actually not sure how I'm going to show this because it's very kind of hard to see. Yeah, it's very hard to see there, but at the top of the leg where it connects into the waist, you can see there's a small green metallic sticker. It's more apparent when this is separating to its 2 fighters, I believe, but as it is now, you can barely see it. But that is sticker 3. You get 2 of them, 1 for each side. That metallic green strip there that you can kind of see very deep recessed near where the leg connects to the hip. And sticker 4, of course, will be for the double beam rifle for this very large sticker here for the scope. So while I have this out, let me just show you really quickly what I was talking about with these silver nub marks. I don't know how we can see that, but the silver part that pokes through the barrel there with this excellent color separation, unfortunately, is exactly where the nub mark is on the runner. Now, if it were undergated, it could probably be offset to the side here, so it would be covered up by the barrel and not visible, but as it is now, there's this pretty unsightly white mark here that you can only really fix by painting it over. So I just left it here as is just to show you what it looks like, to let you know that the silver parts are not undergated. I'll probably just use a dot of Shine Silver Gundam marker to patch that up. But speaking of Shine Silver Gundam marker, there are a couple of color inaccuracies on this kit that require it. So of course I did use the Gundam Shine Silver marker from Metallic Marker Set 2, but the couple of color inaccuracies are pretty minor. On each side of the leg, there's going to be these little details here that need to be in silver. It's just white on it's just one big white piece here for the side armor. Unfortunately, I do think this could have been a color separated part with how much excellent color separation there is all across this kit, as you should be seeing with things like the wing shield here, with all this really nice frame poking through with all these little gray bits. So of course, on both sides of each leg, there's that little detail needs to be in Shine Silver. On the back here, another detail needs to be Shine Silver on the backs of these 2 holders for the wings on the big backpack. These 2 little pieces also need to be in Shine Silver. And then on the Neocore fighter itself, there's going to be these little bits all around the thrusters here, these little red parts. The inside needs to be shaded in a dark gray. I just used a bit of panel liner there and it turned out all right. But again, it's not really that big of a detail, so it isn't that noticeable. But especially on the kit, it is pretty striking once you actually paint it in. It makes for a really nice accent there. So apart from those few minor color apps, everything on this kit is color accurate as you would expect with a master grade, and is actually including a ton more detail than is included on the base liner because, of course, being a VRCA redesign, there is a ton of surface detail all over this kit, mostly through frame parts poking through. You see it on the shoulders there, you see it on those booster units in the knees, you see it on the skirt armor, you especially see it in the wing shields, but there is a ton of frame layering and poking through all over this kit, which makes it appear way more detailed than it is. Even though it is already an incredibly detailed model, it appears even more so with all of that frame poking through, and I think it looks fantastic. In addition, the tweaks it makes to the classic Gundam tricolor scheme with that Titan's navy blue backpack really does tie everything together in my opinion. I absolutely love how this kit looks. There are a couple of things I'm a little bit weirded out by, namely the proportions on the wing shields. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I love the base Double Zeta Gundam, but those wing shields are a bit much, which is why I'm really looking forward to getting the Fats when they reprint that at the end of the year. Make sure to sub notification bell if you don't want to miss that. That's also the main reason why I'm building this one, because I was missing a Master Grade Double Zeta from my collection, and 2, to have as a baseline comparison when I eventually take a look at the Fats. And this design is completely fantastic. Again, it really does feel like a super robot with all of these wacky proportions, with these huge shoulders, the really long feet, those giant wing shields. All of it comes together to make a very unique, imposing Gundam. This thing is quite large. I was actually having a lot of trouble getting all of it in frame as it spun around. I did manage to get most of it. The tips of the Hyper Beam Sabers up there are a little bit cut off, but I absolutely love how this kit looks, and as you can see, it is quite a bulky design. I feel like if anyone's having like a classic like UC collection that they're making, this kit is pretty indispensable and is a fantastic representation for the double Zeta. So yeah, I love how this kit looks. Apart from a couple of those color accents and things like the lower legs that need to be in silver, this kit is essentially entirely color accurate. Of course, for a quick size comparison, here's the double Zeta Gundam next to a standard sized high grade being the high grade Blue Destiny Unit 1 and a standard sized master grade being the master grade Gym Sniper 2 White Dingo team. So as you can see, the double Zeta towers over the two of them. Of course, standing at 20 meters tall in universe, it was always going to be like taller than your typical master grade, and it is exceptionally bulky, as you can see. With how leggy the design is, of course being a Katoki redesign of the double Zeta, the Blue Destiny here is actually shorter than the leg of the double Zeta. So yeah, this thing is absolutely gigantic, and make sure you allocate a corresponding amount of room on your shelf. This thing will take up a ton of space. Of course, for your accessories, here's the double Zeta Verka with everything it comes with. As you can see, this accessory spread is relatively sparse compared to the complexity of the kit itself, but again, most of the gimmicks with the double Zeta aren't in its arsenal. Of course, it is going to be in all of the things the base mobile suit can do and the transformations and all that. So as per usual, starting with our hand options, these are going to be using swappable finger style hands with the thumb on a ball joint and a second point of articulation in the middle of the thumb. I absolutely love these kinds of hands. They're the best hand options for a master grade, in my opinion. They can pull off most of what you would want the kit to do. You miss some of the freedom of the articulated hands, but you also miss out on a lot of the annoyance. So I think it's a pretty fair trade-off. Of course, you will be getting the two closed fists that I have on the kit right now. You'll be getting these two, what looks like open expressive hands, but these are of course going to be holding hands for your hyper beam sabers just because of how large they are. You get one for each side. You will get a trigger finger hand for the double beam rifle, only for the right side. The double Zeta, I'm pretty sure it never uses it with the left hand, and this model kit cannot either. And then you will get these two even tighter closed fists with no articulated thumb. This is going to be used when you transform the double Zeta into G Fortress mode, when mobile suit mode, not really any use for it. Of course, for your main melee options, you will have those two hyper beam sabers up here in the backpack, and for use with them, I didn't actually have it in frame just because it like barely fit, but you will get these two beam saber effect parts. These are perfect grade sized beam saber effect parts. Don't remember exactly what kit they're from. They had a runner design date of 2000, so not exactly sure what kit came out then, but these things are of course going to be gigantic. They stand taller than the head height of the double Zeta itself. These things are incredibly long, and to actually pose the double Zeta using them, I'm probably going to have to take it out of the booth and get the ring light on it just because of how large these effects are, but yeah, these are quite large and impressive, and you'll see them in the posing section. For your adapters, you'll be getting two different action-based adapters. You will get this adapter here for the core base, and for when the kit is in mobile suit mode, this will just slide into the taint there, and it holds the kit quite well. And then you will get this adapter here for when the kit is split up into core top and core base mode. This adapter is for the core top if you want to show it flying around. For your standing pilot figure, you will of course get a 1/100 standing pilot figure of Judo Ashita there. You get two seated pilot figures, but they're identical. They're like generic pilot suit figures. One of them is ostensibly Judo, and the other one is just a generic like HGUC pilot. But of course you get your standing pilot figure here. You get two Neo Core fighters with this kit for display when the double Zeta split up into its two constituent heavy fighters. But of course, when it's in the double Zeta mobile suit mode, one of the Neo Core fighters is in here, and I don't exactly know what the design philosophy is of making like an external armor piece in a very key area with a lot of joints being just the boosters of the Neo Core fighter. That feels a little bit counterintuitive with how it's meant to like preserve itself and eject to save the life of the pilot if the double Zeta is ever destroyed, but hey, what do I know? But you'll of course get a second Neo Core fighter here, which does look pretty good. I do really like how this design looks. And of course you get your second seated pilot figure in there. I accidentally over sanded the canopy of this, so it is a bit loose on there. On the other one, it's not really an issue. And of course you will get two pieces of clear landing gear for use with the Neo Core fighters. And when it's in mobile suit mode, of course, because the Neo Core fighter's in there, not really much to do with this second piece of landing gear. And then you get the double Zeta's only ranged handheld weapon, the double beam rifle here. There is a cockpit in the back here that can open up, and you can place one of your seated pilot figures from either of the Neo Core fighters in here. I'm not exactly sure why you would unless you plan on having your double Zeta displayed in G Fortress mode, because just as a weapon, the guy's just going to be hanging out really awkwardly upside down in the back of the rifle. I think it doesn't really look all that great, but you can put a pilot in there if you want. Otherwise, there's no articulation gimmicks in this, apart from the transformation, of course. So the scope can fold down, the trigger can fold down, the barrels can rotate, but all of that is for the transformation, so there's not really much reason to use it in the actual double beam rifle mode. I do think this weapon looks a little bit awkward because of the transformation gimmicks. The trigger just being here in the middle, it feels a little bit awkward, but apart from that, I do think this is a quite nice looking weapon and definitely fits the Double Zeta's super over the top, super robot design quite well. So of course, as you would expect from a Master Grade, everything you would expect to see with the Double Zeta is here. The only thing that's really missing in my opinion, and this is, I wasn't even really expecting this. This is just a kind of hope for me that a future Double Zeta kit will include this, but a beam effect part for showing the high mega cannon firing, because it's just such an iconic part of the Double Zeta's arsenal, and that high mega cannon firing pose is probably the way most people would pose their Double Zetas. So I hope that in the future they will release a kit that includes a beam effect for that, but there is none here. So getting into articulation, I'm going to be covering articulation that is not involved in the transformation, of course. So starting as usual with the head. For an upward look, you get a very minor upward look for the Double Zeta's head right there. For a downward look, the neck is also on a hinge that allows for the Double Zeta to look into its own chest. You will get some minor side to side tilt, with this cuff really getting in the way of the back of the head in particular. You can presumably 360 this with great difficulty, but before it becomes very hard, the model's like really fighting me as I'm rotating this, you can get almost a 90-degree tilt to either side. In the shoulder then, there's plenty of articulation gimmicks. The shoulder itself can slide out of the torso to facilitate a about 45-degree bend, maybe a little bit less. Without pulling the shoulder out, you get very little shoulder swing there. The actual shoulder armor can rotate independently of the arm, although it's a little bit tight after top coating, to facilitate a 135-degree raise without actually rotating the shoulder or anything. And with rotating the shoulder to look really awkward and horrible, you can get a full last shooting pose out of the Double Zeta. But of course, it looks horrible, so there's not really a reason to do that with how much you need to swing the shoulder armor out of the way. You do get full rotation in the upper bicep, but while the joint allows for the full rotation, the actual proportions of this kit does not. Realistically, you're going to get up maybe 45 degrees before the wing shield will collide with the huge backpack there. Again, the joint allows for a full 360 in the shoulder, but because of that really large backpack getting in the way, you can only really get maybe a 90-degree raise if you position the shoulder correctly. A full double bend in the elbow will allow for a 135-degree bend. The wing shield is of course going to be on a hinge for both of these two individual flaps, so they can fold up and down exactly how you want them to get them out of the way of the shoulders and things when you're doing poses. The wrist is not going to be on a ball joint, it is going to be on a peg, so unfortunately, the only actual articulation we'll get out of it is going to be rotation. You can 360 rotate the hand if you want. The thumb is going to be on a ball joint with a point of articulation in the middle, like I mentioned earlier. In the torso then, rather unusually for a transformed kit, there actually is some articulation in the torso. Although, it's not really the torso, it's more the hip, because there's a hip swing that allows for this kind of faux ab crunch, although it is quite impressive, especially for this transformed kit. You normally get pretty much no torso articulation in these. You will get some incredibly minor side to side tilt, although it is present, and you get pretty much no back crunch, which is a very good thing considering how bulky and heavy the actual backpack for the Double Zeta is. Now, there is no open cockpit hatch gimmick. You can't open up the center thing, but this is one of the two locks holding the top half down onto the Neocore fighter, so I wouldn't really recommend you display your Double Zeta with the cockpit hatch open, and it's very hard to get to after top coating. So you can't open it up to show the pilot Judo Ashita in there inside of his Neocore fighter. I forgot to rotate his seat before I reassembled the Double Zeta, so my bad. He's supposed to be facing forward, but he's facing downward. But just don't do any kind of crazy posing after you lift the cockpit hatch, because again, it's one of the two things holding this entire kit together, with the other one being in the back here, kind of wedged behind the backpack. It's kind of hard to see. In the backpack itself then, for the Hyper Beam Sabers, these are on a rotating rail, but that's mostly for the transformation into G-Fortress mode, and the actual Hyper Beam Sabers themselves are going to be on ball joints that you can rotate as you want. In addition, for the 221 missile launchers on the backpack there, these doors will open up to expose the missiles inside, so you can open them up if you want to show the Double Zeta firing them. These flaps on the bottom can also rotate up and down, and these wings can spread open, but that's mostly for the transformation. In the waist then, the front skirts can rotate upwards 135 degrees, and they can also swing and pivot. They are on an arm. Again, I'm pretty sure it's for the transformation. The side skirts are going to be on ball joints and additionally on a hinge, which will do ball joint and hinge things. There are no back skirts to speak of because of how large the backpack is. For your kicks then, utilizing the hip swing mechanism and swinging the knee out of the way of the front skirt, you can get over a 90-degree front kick, you can get about a 60-degree side kick, and utilizing the hip swing, you can get a 45-degree back kick. So a lot better than I was expecting, given how insanely bulky this design is. Very impressive. You will get full rotation in the upper thigh, but again, the proportions will be blocking you at about a 135-degree bend, so way more than anyone would need for any kind of poses you want to spin the leg for. A full double bend in the knee will give you a 90-degree knee bend, which is a lot more than I was expecting, given how, again, how bulky this design is. The flap here can open up on the ankle, and these two side flaps can swing outward. For overall toe dips, you will get a fairly decent toe dip. For overall raises, you will get a surprisingly high raise, given how large this armor is. There is a separate flap here on the heel that can rotate in and out as you would want. Unfortunately, there is no heel-toe separation. There is a sliding gimmick, but again, I'm pretty sure it's for the transformation. For your side tilt, you will get about 45 degrees to either side, and you can 360 the foot about the peg. So overall, the Double Zeta Gundam here has a really incredible range of articulation and really defied my expectations for this kit. Again, I was expecting it to be really jank in line with the Victory 2 Gundam, which is another kit that's made up of several transforming parts that all combine together. This kit really does do what I hoped the Victory 2 did, which was integrate all those transformations and all those gimmicks while also preserving the articulation to pull off what you would want this design to do. So very impressed with the articulation on display here. So, of course, let's see the articulation in action and some poses. So getting the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Ver.Ka into a spin, this is normally where I would start with a running and gunning pose, but as you might be able to imagine from the very poor leg articulation backwards and the extremely bulky proportions of this kit and the very back-heavy nature of it, it really can't hit a running and gunning pose. It's just not possible. So instead I did this kind of wide-legged, very, I guess, powerful firing pose with the double beam rifle, and honestly this is a pretty good contender for something to pose this kit doing on your shelf. The design of the Double Zeta, and this kit very much shines in displaying the bulk, the heft, the size of the Double Zeta rather than any pose emphasizing dynamic motion or like nimbleness or any kind of like agility. This pose where you're emphasizing the heft and the power of the weapon really is where the Double Zeta shines. Now the double beam rifle is unfortunately a little bit awkward in its proportions. The very long stock, in addition to looking kind of goofy because again it's a core part of the transformation into G-Fortress mode, also interferes a lot with the shoulder. You're seeing the right shoulder, the large blue part, I need to actually kind of fold it and tilt it out of the way of the double beam rifle, and it's kind of wedging itself in between it and the hyper beam saber. Most of the poses that you can get the Double Zeta into that aren't just a basic standing pose have a really bad tendency to mash like a bunch of parts of it against each other, so just be very careful while you're handling this kit. I did actually like wear off the top coat in several areas, and some of the smaller decals did end up falling off while I was posing this, just because of all of the abrasion from the different parts of the kit colliding with each other as you're posing it. This is a very complex kit with a lot of moving parts, and you need to keep that in mind while you pose it. So honestly, this kind of basic firing pose is around where the Double Zeta actually works best. I was thinking I would want to have it in the high mega cannon firing pose, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But as it is, this is a pretty cool pose for the Double Zeta and something I'm actually doing on my shelf right now, albeit a slightly modified version holding a hyper beam saber in the offhand. So getting the kit in the closest approximation of crouching as I could in a defensive pose with the wing shields kind of covering the Double Zeta's midsection to protect the pilot, with the 42 missiles in the back like all being deployed with the doors open. And now this is about as close as I get to a proper crouching pose. As you saw in the articulation section, the backwards kick articulation of the legs is extremely poor because of that incredibly bulky backpack. So what this means is you can't get the back leg properly on the ground to get a proper crouch or kneeling pose. Instead you get this pose here where it looks like the Double Zeta's rolled its ankle and is about to stumble over. So while it is stable and balanced, it looks absolutely horrific. Again, it looks like the Double Zeta twisted its ankle and it's going to need an extended period of time in the shop to get fixed. So this pose is pretty horrific, but it does show off that the missiles in the back do look really cool. I love how they look as a weapon. In another pose, I might consider using it as the primary weapon, but in a pose like this, it simply doesn't work and it looks pretty awful, so I would not consider doing anything remotely similar to this on the shelf. Again, you want the Double Zeta in a pose to emphasize its size and heft, and this crouching pose really isn't it. So, of course, getting the Double Zeta into the high mega cannon pose, or at least kind of, as you'll see as this spins around, the extremely heavy weight of the backpack really pulls the torso backwards. While it has a very nice forward ab crunch, you can't use it for an extended period of time just because of how heavy that backpack is, which is really unfortunate. It's very rare that you see these kind of transforming kits that have decent torso articulation, and while the Double Zeta really only has it in a forward ab crunch, that's really all you need to pull off the high mega cannon firing pose, and unfortunately the large backpack prohibits that from happening. So while I really wanted to have this kit doing this on the shelf, and I think a lot of people picking this kit up would want to have their Double Zeta doing the high mega cannon firing pose, it just doesn't really work out because of the weight issues of this kit, which is unfortunate because I think it does everything you would want the Double Zeta to do very well. It shows off the size and heft of the kit with the limbs at full extension. It shows off the power if you're familiar with the High Mega Cannon itself. It is, I think, in lore at the time that the Double Zeta existed in universe, it was like the most, or one of the most powerful weapons on a mobile suit like ever. So showing the Double Zeta firing it in its incredibly iconic pose is definitely near the top for the list of poses you would want to do with this kit. Unfortunately, the balance issues do prohibit that from looking good. And in addition, this kit does have some additional balance issues, being very kind of right heavy while it's holding the double beam rifle. So I do have the arm of my Action Base 4 here sideways so it doesn't like tilt and snap and break something. You do have to be very careful while you're balancing this kit. Very similar to something like the Ifrit Cavalier with the Zagaxi Freedom version. That was so heavy it snapped the adapters of one of my action bases. The Double Zeta, I feel, has a similar problem where if you're not very careful while you're balancing the kit on the arm, you may break one of the adapters either for the base or for the Double Zeta itself. So this pose is something I would definitely get the Double Zeta into, get a picture of it for posterity's sake, because, well, it's the High Mega Cannon firing pose of the Double Zeta, you kind of have to. But I really wouldn't have it doing it on the shelf because of the aforementioned balance issues. But of course, mobile suit mode isn't the only thing the Double Zeta can do. I'll get into the Hyper Beam Saber near the end while I'm talking about the conclusion, because there isn't that much to talk about besides it being large, but here it is transformed into G-Fortress mode on the ground with the landing gear deployed. Now, it's only balancing on one piece of the landing gear because it's so long that it can't fit on my spinning Mr. Turntable L, I think that's what it was called, but this is a fairly large rotating base, and the Double Zeta in G-Fortress mode cannot fit on it. And of course it's out in the open, very similar to the High Mega Cannon firing pose, just because the Double Zeta is so large it doesn't fit in the booth. Now, the transformation into G-Fortress mode was actually really seamless. I was surprised at how smooth it was. The only part I really ran into any difficulty was with the head. I don't know if I was reading the manual wrong, but I couldn't really articulate it in a way that the double beam rifle could fit over it very easily, and the V-fins folding down kept getting in the way of things and kept falling off. So honestly, I would recommend just taking off the V-fin instead of folding it down. It just was very annoying to work with and actually get properly mounted with the double beam rifle. But apart from that, this entire transformation like went off without a hitch. My first time doing it, I was able to transform it in under 5 minutes, which for a kit this large and complex with this many moving parts is really impressive. And this is a very convincing transformation, all things considered. Normally these kinds of transformed mobile suits just look like a mobile suit scrunched up underneath a flight pack, and the Double Zeta genuinely does its best to look like a heavy fighter or bomber spacecraft here. With the way the hands and feet kind of fold into their own limbs to be replaced with the thrusters on the insides of the hollow parts built into the frame, it just looks incredibly convincing, and it does look fantastic, honestly. If I didn't like the mobile suit mode for the Double Zeta so much, I would definitely just have it in G-Fortress mode on the shelf, and it looks really dynamic when you have it in the air, as you'll see during the conclusion section. But this is an incredibly impressive transformation. You should definitely, if you get this kit, you should definitely try it out. And you should definitely snap a picture of it at least, just because of how good it looks and how well it holds together with multiple locking points to hold it in a very convincing form here in G-Fortress mode. Now, what's a little bit less convincing is when you split it up into the core top and core base, which is a little bit unfortunate because I think one of the cooler applications for the Double Zeta, due to its lack of, I guess, posing in mobile suit mode because of its poor articulation in very specific areas, is having a diorama where it's actually combining into the Double Zeta with the core base and core top here. Unfortunately, I think it looks pretty awful to have it like this. It's very awkward looking. The core top is actually light enough that I could hold it on this Action Base 7, meant for 1/144th scale kits, so the weight of that isn't really an issue. The core base, however, is incredibly large, and with the mounting point, it's very unbalanced and unwieldy. The balance of the transform mode is very clearly designed with the G-Fortress mode in mind. With the two separated, the balance is all over the place, especially for the core base, so I did have to reposition my Action Base very carefully in order to get it balanced and not tipping over. So while it is cool that they replicated the whole transformation gimmick where the Double Zeta can split up into its constituent parts, it's not really something I would consider doing. Again, this is really an option to get the Double Zeta into, snap a picture for posterity, and then reassemble it immediately back into G-Fortress mode, because I think it looks really goofy, particularly the core base. I think the core top looks okay, albeit a little bit goofy with that giant hollow part missing in the middle of the back. The core base, on the other hand, looks really bad. The illusion of G-Fortress mode being a very large, heavy space bomber is kind of broken here with how back heavy the core base is. It really just looks like a pair of legs folded up with the core fighter docked onto the front of it, which is odd because I didn't really see it in G-Fortress mode, but in core base mode it's very apparent. So not really something I would consider posing it doing on the shelf, but it was fairly easy to get it into this mode. and I think you should do it at least once just to snap a picture of it at the very minimum. So here is the double Zeta zoomed out with the Hyper Beam Saber just to show off how large that perfect grade sized beam effect part is. I'm going to be zooming in a moment because this is a little bit annoying to look at least for me, but this is an incredibly large, impressive weapon, and definitely something to consider posing this kit doing on the shelf. Maybe not in a swinging pose, because as you can see, the articulation of the double Zeta isn't really all that conducive to a good melee pose. The lack of wrist articulation, because the joint for the hand going into the wrist is a peg instead of a ball joint, so you really don't have the articulation you would want to convey a melee swing. In addition, the poor leg articulation and minimal torso rotation does mean it is very hard to convey any kind of force going behind the swing of the Hyper Beam Saber. So it's something I would consider having the kit holding on the shelf just to look big and impressive, not something I would consider it actually swinging around. So I'll leave this rotating a little bit so you can marvel at the size of the Hyper Beam Saber as I talk about the conclusion. So in conclusion, the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Verka is an incredibly impressively engineered kit. It is a just marvel to work with and build and watch how all of the gimmicks are like fully replicated in model kit form without hampering the articulation too much. A lot of the issues with articulation I believe has to do with the proportions of the Double Zeta itself, and particularly the backpack, more so than any of the transformation gimmicks. So I feel like this kind of problem would exist as long as you don't modify the size of the backpack. So the build for this kit is very unique and interesting. Many of the parts throughout the build are very oddly shaped, and the assembly is very unorthodox, with you needing to build in various hollow spaces within the frame to store the thrusters, or when it's transformed to G-Fortress mode, the limbs, the fists or the feet or whatever. All of it builds up in this incredibly interesting and unique way, although there are a few down points you need to keep in mind. While much of the kit is undergated, the silver parts seen throughout are not, so the nub marks on them are very apparent in parts like the double beam rifle. In addition, this kit is very heavily C-clip reliant, with many small and fragile parts relying on C-clips to mount properly that do serve as very prominent break risks. And I did break some of the very small landing gear pieces to use when it's in core top mode, but apart from they don't really serve that much purpose, so it isn't the biggest deal in the world if you break them, but various other parts do attach with C-clips and are very big break risks, so that's just something to keep in mind. In addition, there are various loss risks throughout the kit, namely the very small silver barrel piece for the high mecha cannon in the forehead is a part-separated piece, which is great, but unfortunately its very small size does mean it is incredibly easy to lose, especially if you have carpet. I think all of that aside, the build is incredibly unique and pleasant, but it's also very complex. It does take a lot more time than a typical master grade to fully build up, so if you plan to get this kit, make sure to allocate the amount of time that you have to build accordingly. If you have like a few hours a day, make sure to allocate at least a couple of weekends to building this monster of a kit. In terms of aesthetics and color accuracy, this kit is quite good. There's a ton of different layering and frame details, particularly on the wing shields, where all the little black accents you see are actually frame bits poking through. This kit makes use of layering parts and frame details incredibly well and looks fantastic. Unfortunately, the kit is not entirely color accurate, with things like the insides of barrels needing to be shaded in black, which is a pretty typical thing to not be color accurate even in master grades. What's a little bit more disappointing is there are some silver accents on the sides of the lower legs right above the feet, and on the backpack, like around where the wings are. The holders for them also have some accent parts that need to be painted in silver. Those parts very easily could have had parts to mount the silver parts on the silver plated runner, but just did not. So that's just a little bit of color app that you're going to have to do yourself in order to get this thing entirely color accurate. But once it is, it does look fantastic. It's incredibly visually striking. It does look like a huge super robot monster on your shelf, which is definitely what the design is going for, and it's an incredibly unique addition to have on the shelf next to anything else. I think it's an indispensable part of any kind of early UC display or collection, but that's just me. I know the Double Zeta's design is very polarizing to a lot of people with how super robot it is, but apart from the very large proportions on the shoulders and wing shields, I absolutely love it, but that is something you're going to have to decide for yourself. In terms of accessories, the Double Zeta does come with essentially everything you would expect it to. The only thing that's a little bit disappointing is that you don't have a duplicate trigger finger hand on the left side to hold the double beam rifle, but I don't think the Double Zeta actually holds the double beam rifle with its left hand at any point, so it's completely fine and understandable that they only included one on the right side. Not the biggest deal in the world. You are missing some open expressive hands, unfortunately, with the two included in the kit actually being the holding hands for the Hyper Beam Sabers. So your hand options are fairly limited, but do include everything you would probably want to have the Double Zeta doing. In addition, the only handheld weapon that this kit has, the double beam rifle, looks fantastic and impressive, and really integrates with the kit, especially in G-Fortress mode, very well, and it does its job perfectly. The addition of a second Neo Core fighter in order to replicate the gimmick where the double Zeta split up into the core top and core base is also very appreciated, and having it in a display next to the double Zeta mobile suit mode with the standing pilot figure of Judo Ashita is also a very cool way to use it, and is how I'm displaying it on my shelf right now. Most of the weapons and gimmicks of the double Zeta are integrated into the mobile suit itself, so it's not the biggest deal in the world that the accessory spread is relatively sparse compared to some other kits. In terms of articulation, this is where the double Zeta really did surprise me, having much more articulation than I was expecting, especially considering its gimmick of splitting up into multiple transforming fighter units and an overall transformation to a large heavy fighter unit. Having a moderate range of articulation in spite of that is very impressive, especially considering this kit only came out 2 years after the V2 Gundam Ver-Ka, which had absolutely arthritic articulation. It could barely pull off a pose to save its life. So very pleasantly surprised with this kit. Unfortunately though, the articulation isn't enough to pull off many of the dynamic poses you might want to have this kit doing. In particular, the large proportions of the huge backpack really limit your back leg articulation and your back arm articulation. So even things like the high mega cannon firing pose, the heavy backpack also hinders you there, pulling the torso backwards and making the firing pose look a lot less dynamic than you would otherwise want it to be. So articulation is decent in a vacuum in terms of like actually posing it with consideration to its proportions and the actual design of the kit. It isn't the greatest in the world. So would I recommend this kit? If you don't hate the design, absolutely. I feel like this kit does enough unique things and pulls it off with a good enough execution that most people should consider at least experiencing this kit in general. Being essentially the best version of the Double Zeta Gundam widely available, I know there's an enhanced Double Zeta Ver-Ka, but that's a P-Band exclusive, and the FATS was out of print for a pretty long time before the reprint was announced for the end of this year. The Double Zeta Gundam does everything it sets out to do very well. It pulls off all of the transforming gimmicks quite well, and it pulls off being a quite large, imposing, and very detailed kit that really stands out on your shelf. I would consider it worthy of being a centerpiece kit with just how large and impressive it is. I haven't built things like the Zeta Ver-Ka, so I don't know exactly how it stacks up to that, but on its own, it is a very good kit and definitely worth your money. It is a fantastic addition to any collection if you haven't picked it up or tried it out. Again, if you don't hate the design, definitely give it a go. It is a wonderful kit to build. So that was my review of the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Ver-Ka. Sorry, this review is coming out later than I was expecting it to, with how complex the kit was and me leaving on a short vacation. It just took much more time than I was expecting to actually build it up. But what do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to submit notification bells so you don't miss future reviews. If you like this video, give it a like. And I'll see you next time with my review of the high grade Leo flight unit equipped type. I'll see you then.